How is everyone doing this fine New Year's morning? You're doing great. But this last year has been pretty brutal, right? We're all kind of glad, I think, today's New Year's. But, we've got the election cycle. We had the election, terrorism, Aleppo and Syria, Standing Rock. Do you want me to keep listing off? I'm sorry. Yeah. I understand, yes, the list goes on. But when I think about that, it's easy to lose hope. And since the election, I think we've all been feeling really down. It's easy because of the sheer scope of what's been happening around the world. It's easy because of what's been happening close to home. It's easy because of the 24-hour news cycle. It's easy because Facebook's algorithms push our friends' posts about the latest tragedy to the top of our news feed. It's easy because with this, I have access to every piece of information in the world all the time. I have all the news. I got CNN on here. I've got NBC News on here. I like news, but it is depressing. So what can we do about it? About this seemingly endless stream of post-truth era bad news. The Reverend Dr. Rebecca Parker, she's the former president of Starr King School for the Ministry, where I go, writes about lamentation. Lamentation, she writes, has three voices. The voice of sorrow or grief, the voice of anger or protest, the voice of trust or what sustains us. And she noted that last voice, the voice of what sustains us, is often the hardest to hear. When I wrote about this for school, creating a triptych poem made up of 3 haikus, I wrote about the ending of things. I wrote about my sorrow. I wrote about my anger. But most importantly, I also wrote about trust, because I do trust. What sustains me, what I trust, is that hope is real. That hope is, in fact, a real thing. Because without hope, what's the point? See the glass? Is it half full or half empty? Right? We all know how this idea works. Oh, I'm really thirsty. My mouth was so dry when I was singing that song, I could barely speak. Excuse me, I'm trying to finish it. I may skip that because I don't need to spill it all over myself. But now it's not half full or half empty. It's mostly empty. So that idea, maybe that's over. Much of what we have talked about here in this community over the last couple of months has been the resulting fallout of the election cycle. It was brutal. It was like, even when we're cheering for our candidates, whoever they may be, the other side is saying things beyond the pale. We spent close to 2 years listening to hateful rhetoric, demagoguery, and lies from a cast of nefarious characters straight out of a political satire. And we ended up with Dr. Strangelove. But within this community, in our community, there are cracks in our sorrow, cracks in our anger, and there are little bits of hope appearing. Bits of hope coming together, bits of hope coalescing in meetings, plans of action, and community forums. In his song Anthem, Leonard Cohen sings this: "Ring the bells that still can ring. Forget your perfect offering. There is a crack in everything. That's how the light gets in." If you were here in this sanctuary for the meeting a few weeks ago to discuss what social justice issues are the most important to the members of this congregation, then you heard the bells ringing. You saw the sorrow and the anger starting to crack, and you felt the light of hope shining in this sanctuary as all of us shared. How many people? It was maybe 50 or 60. I think it was even more than that. 63. I was close. sharing what they saw as the most important issues facing us globally, facing us locally. And without hope, why would anyone have bothered to show up? They wouldn't have, because it wouldn't matter. But having hope is tiring, my friends. It is tiring to think about the activism necessary to carry our visions of social justice to the world. Now, in this movement, before we move forward, I would like all of us to take a few deep breaths, to power ourselves up to think about how are we going to carry hope forward. In through the nose, out through the mouth. In through the nose, out through the mouth. Okay. So where do we find that which sustains the hope within us? Howard Zinn, an American historian and social activist, wrote the following words: "To be hopeful in bad times is not just foolishly romantic. It is based on the fact that human history is a history not only of cruelty, but also of compassion, sacrifice, courage, kindness. What we choose to emphasize in this complex history will determine our lives. If we see only the worst, it destroys our capacity to do something. If we remember those times and places, and there are so many, where people have behaved magnificently, this gives us the energy to act, and at least the possibility of sending this spinning top of a world in a different direction. And if we do act, in however small a way, we don't have to wait for some grand utopian future. The future is an infinite succession of presents, and to live now as we think human beings should live, in defiance of all that is bad around us, is itself a marvelous victory." So he says that we must see our history, human history, contains not only the bad, but also compassion, sacrifice, courage, and kindness. That we must remember where and when people have behaved magnificently. When I think about the nature of despair, how tired we, all of us get when we're faced with all that is bad around us. I'm thinking about the morning of November 9th, waking up and being like, what just happened? I look to the people who have behaved magnificently. Think about Nelson Mandela. He was in prison for 27 years. At the beginning, he was pretty angry. He was working through some stuff. But through all of it, he was advocating for an end to apartheid in South Africa via an inclusive government for all of the people, not just one group of people within the country, which is what South Africa had been doing for so many years. And it was well within his rights to say, I want a government for me and my people. But he didn't. But how many of us would have had his energy and his drive to continue that positive activism during imprisonment, let alone 27 years of imprisonment, and then afterwards, and leading the country through reconciliation? Mandela wrote, "I am fundamentally an optimist. Whether or not that comes from nature or nurture, I cannot say. Part of being optimistic is keeping one's head pointed towards the sun, one's feet moving forward. There were many dark moments when my faith in humanity was sorely tested, but I would not and could not give myself up to despair. That way lays defeat and death." A little bit of a tongue twister there. Like in the song earlier that I was singing, Mandela kept his feet moving forward. He kept walking, even though he was imprisoned. Well, his optimism kept him from despair. And at the end of the day, his vision of a radically different South Africa came to fruition. Who is your role model for hope? There is a traditional Benedictine practice known as Lectio Divina, or sacred reading. Historically, it's done using biblical scripture. But I encourage you to think about this as a framework for drawing from the sacred texts that you value. There are 4 steps involved. The first is reading. The second is meditating. The third is praying. And the fourth is contemplating on the words that have been read. For me, I tend to gravitate towards the Tao Te Ching, using Lao Tzu's words for my lectio. When I'm feeling despair or lack of hope, I might open the Tao Te Ching to a chapter like number 29, which I'll read for you now. Do you think you can take over the universe and improve it? I do not believe it can be done. The universe is sacred. You cannot improve it. If you try to change it, you will ruin it. If you try to hold it, you will lose it. So sometimes things are ahead and sometimes they are behind. Sometimes breathing is hard and sometimes it comes easily. Sometimes there is strength and sometimes weakness. Sometimes one is up and sometimes down. Therefore, the sage avoids extremes, excesses, and complacency. Taking the time to fully ingest the passage, I will hold the words in silent meditation. Admittedly, I'm a little or maybe a lot lacking in the prayer department, for better or for worse. So I tend to move straight to contemplation. Usually I find that some portion of whatever I've read, one or two sentences from anything I've read, stands out as being what's most meaningful to me. And depending on the nature of my stresses and concerns for the day, I tend to find different meanings and applications of the words each time I contemplate a particular passage in the Tao Te Ching. It's short, it's 81 chapters, it's 5,000 Chinese characters. It takes about an hour to read if you're paying a lot of attention. And sometimes I don't even contemplate words. I may have been listening to Stravinsky or looking at an art installation by the Chinese artist Wu Wei. What sacred words or art give you hope? Fundamentally, the words of Howard Zinn and Nelson Mandela are about the eternal nature of human optimism. Without optimism, how could we possibly hold hope in our hearts? When Martin Luther King Jr. spoke, as he did, about infinite hopes, he certainly acknowledged the disappointment that we all feel at times. With the words that he wrote, we must accept finite disappointment, but never lose infinite hope. Dr. King makes an important point for us. Yes, there are always going to be disappointments, but we must remember Dr. King's idea that disappointments are finite. They have an end. Something bad happens. Our disappointment is overwhelming in the moment. November 9th, overwhelming. And with time, though, we move forward. It's the nature, I think, of being human. So, as we remember the finite nature of disappointment, we must also remember Dr. King's belief that the hope is infinite and inherent in us. And as our outgoing President of the United States has said about hope, the best way not to feel hopeless is to get up and do something. Don't wait for good things to happen to you. If you go out and you make some good things happen, remember that, make some good things happen, you will fill the world with hope. You will fill yourself with hope. As perhaps our most pragmatic president to date, he also said late on election day November 8th, no matter what happens tonight, the sun will rise in the morning. We must remember these ideas. Our capability for hope is infinite. Our ability to do good works is only limited by our willingness to make them happen. I have to say, all this talking is doing a number on my voice. It's time for a water break. It's full. I am not going to try to drink this. That wouldn't work. And I'd probably have to leave very quickly and excuse myself. To me, the glass is not about being an optimist or a pessimist. And whether or not it's full or empty is inconsequential, because sometimes I need an empty glass. Like when I'm trapping a spider or an insect in the house and I want to get it outside. I don't want a full glass of water. I'm going to make a huge mess. And sometimes I want a full glass of water because I'm thirsty. Or I want to fill it with rocks and put a flower in it with some water. So I don't know. But to me, I really am thirsty. But to me, the glass is just a vessel. It's just a vessel to be filled. It's not a simplistic metaphor for our ability to be optimistic or pessimistic. My answer for the age-old question of whether or not the glass is half full or half empty depends on the day of the week, what's going on in the world, and how I'm feeling at the time. I would hope that my answer would be half full more often than not, but that is beside the point. To me, the glass represents our ability to be filled, the dreams that we dream, the angers that we harbor within us, the hopes that can make some good things happen. We can choose what we carry inside of us. We can fill the vessel however we choose. Metaphors aside, as we enter this new year, we all have choices to make. We can exist within our disappointments, carrying them into the future, letting them taint our view of the world, in spite of the finite nature of disappointment, as Dr. King said. Or we can exist within our hopes, reveling in their infinite nature, letting them drive us to do good works. And the choice is always ours. Recently, in one of my classes at Star King, something happened that caused me to question my own relationship to Taoism in the face of the pressing need for social justice through activism. As a Unitarian Universalist, social justice and the activism that goes along with trying to enable change in the world is a cornerstone of our faith tradition. But the overwhelming hugeness of the problems we now face as citizens of both this nation and the world might cause us to wonder what we can do. Taoism has a concept known as Wu Wei, variously translated as either actionless action or effortless action. In class, there was a debate about actionless action and whether a Taoist would do anything if you can't improve the universe, as I quoted earlier. Or you may have to abide by actionless action, which means what? You sit, sitting on the couch, doing nothing. That's actionless action. So in my research to discover an answer, or maybe just my answer, I don't know if it's bigger than that, to the question of what does it mean to do social justice in the face of actionless action, Wu Wei, I found out something interesting. First off, Lao Tzu, he exhorted us to waste no effort in our actions. Effortless action. Actionless action is a little bit of a red herring. Effortless action. This is a lot different from actionless action. You don't look effortless just sitting on the couch. You look actionless. Effortless action is when Michael Jordan dunks a basketball or Tom Brady throws another touchdown pass because the game's going on right now and I don't know what's happening. And I love the Patriots. Go Patriots. Secondly, Lao Tzu understood the daunting nature of large tasks. Imagine, if you will, if the Freedom Riders had given up the first time a bus was stopped on its way into the South, and that the mob violence that was allowed by the police had stopped the effort completely. Each Freedom Rider believed in the cause and played a small part in the overall effort to bring civil rights to a hugely disenfranchised portion of our citizenry. It was an undertaking of many, many years, as the whole civil rights movement was. Any single participant might have wondered if their individual effort was making a difference. In chapter 63 of the Tao Te Ching, Lao Tzu addresses this. And if you know your history of Chinese philosophers, you might know that Lao Tzu was writing the Tao Te Ching just as the Great Wall was in the initial stages of construction. Building a giant wall that was several thousand miles long was certainly a daunting task, one that took hundreds and hundreds of years to complete, which someone may want to mention to our president-elect. Lao Tzu writes these two sentences in chapter 63. Achieve greatness in little things. Achieve greatness in little things. And in the universe, great acts are made up of small deeds. So great acts are made up of small deeds. Each of us may feel overwhelmed by the enormity of the social justice actions needed in the world today. We may feel like it's hopeless. As Grand gestures of activism are too much for our current lives. But if we listen to the voices of the spiritual paths like Lao Tzu's or whatever spiritual path you follow, we will find that as long as we do something, we are moving the world forward. Feeding hands? Check. You are reducing the suffering of others, as Reverend Kusala Bhikshu reminded us several weeks ago. Providing witness at Adelanto? Check. You are integral in both letting the world know that someone cares about the people there and what's happening, and in letting the prisoners there know that someone cares about them. Did you bring something for Manna today? Chuck's pretty full. Check. You are providing nourishment to someone in need. These are not grand gestures that will change the world in one fell swoop. They are small things. These are little things, as Lao Tzu says, the small deeds that he writes about. But in their totality, they make a difference. Making a difference in one person's life counts. Making some good things happen, as Obama said, is the recipe for hope. I'm going to leave you with a poem. It's by Dorothy Parker. She was an American poet, an Oscar-winning screenwriter, and an activist. And she wrote this knowing full well that hope is bastioned at least partially by our ability to laugh and to find humor in the darkness. Its title is Inventory. For be the things I am wiser to know, idleness, sorrow, a friend, and a foe. For be the things I'd been better without, love, curiosity, freckles, and doubt. 3 be the things I shall never attain, envy, content, and sufficient champagne. 3 be the things I shall have till I die, laughter and hope, and a sock in the eye. Namaste, blessed be, and amen.